What would make a highly respected rabbi, a man of deep knowledge, heritage, and tradition, leave everything behind and start over, not for fame, not for rebellion, but for something far more powerful? Truth. In a world full of noise, distractions, and spiritual confusion, one man's journey cuts through the chaos. A man who had everything, status, respect, identity, but still felt an emptiness he couldn't explain, until one night a single verse from the Quran pierced through decades of doctrine and changed his life forever. This isn't just a story about changing faiths. It's a story about finding purpose, facing loss, and discovering peace in the most unexpected place. His transformation will challenge what you think you know about faith, identity, and the courage it takes to follow truth when it costs you everything. Stay with us till the end, because this story isn't just about him. It's a mirror that might reflect your own questions, your own struggles, and maybe even your own turning point. Let's begin. He was a man who had spent his entire life in the pursuit of religious scholarship. As a rabbi, he was a guardian of tradition, a teacher of sacred text, and a symbol of religious authority. Yet, behind the layers of ritual and theology, he was restless. Was he a skeptic? Since he was a mirrored man to challenge it, he was also a symbol of religious authority. Yet behind the layers of ritual and theology, he was restless. He followed the law, performed the prayers, led congregations, and gave answers to others. But within himself, he carried questions that tradition could not fully answer. He felt a disconnect between the structured, often rigid framework of his faith and the inner need for a deeper, more intimate connection with the divine. His life was filled with practices, customs, and rules, but the experience felt more like a routine than a relationship. He lost faith and felt disconnection between himself. The longing for clarity, for peace, and for a sense of spiritual wholeness continued to grow. It wasn't that he doubted the existence of God. On the contrary, his belief was strong, but he struggled to feel that nearness, that tranquility the soul yearns for. In the silence of night, away from his congregation and community, he began to explore other perspectives, not to reject his own heritage, but to understand whether there was something beyond what he had always known. So experiencing the nearness, the secret text, not to experience the expansion of humanity, but to understand whether there was something beyond what he had always known. His search wasn't rebellious, it was sincere. He wasn't looking for religion as an identity, he was seeking truth as a necessity. And what struck him most in Islam was not the rituals or the cultural expressions, it was the simplicity of its spiritual message. The idea that there is one God, that he is near, that he responds to those who call upon him, not through intermediaries, not through complicated processes, but directly and mercifully, was profoundly refreshing. What he had once seen as foreign became a source of healing. The words of the Quran didn't clash with his mind. They resonated with his heart. He began to realize that spiritual fulfillment isn't about how much knowledge one accumulates. It's about how that knowledge brings you closer to the Creator. He had studied deeply, argued brilliantly, taught passionately, but for the first time, he began to feel spiritually present. Islam didn't invalidate his past, it gave it context. It answered the questions that knowledge alone couldn't solve, and in that moment, he understood He had been living a life full of answers, but still missing the truth. It wasn't a grand debate or an intellectual showdown that changed everything for him. It was just a verses, simple, clear, but deeply powerful. After years of rigorous theological study, legal interpretations, and endless commentary, he came across a single verse from the Quran that struck a chord so deep it bypassed the intellect and went straight to the soul. It spoke of surrender, of humility before the Creator, and of the mercy that awaits those who turn to Him with sincerity. That one moment was unlike any other. It wasn't a verse he had planned to read. It wasn't part of a structured comparison or academic exploration. It happened almost accidentally, late one night in the quiet of his home when no one was watching. The verse spoke about the essence of life, not as a checklist of laws, but as a relationship between the human heart and its maker. It shattered the mental pride he had built over decades, the kind that often comes with deep scholarship, and the never. The verse spoke about the essence of laws, but as a relationship between two men clearly studied, kind of uncanniness For the first time, he felt as though the text was not just speaking to him, but about him, his fears, his doubts, his hidden longing, all reflected back to divine words. In that moment, he wasn't a rabbi, a scholar, or a religious leader. He was just a human being, vulnerable, in need, and overwhelmed by truth that couldn't be explained, only felt. That single verse did what years of intellectual effort never could. It opened a door. It made him realize that truth is not always something you conquer with logic. Sometimes it's something that conquers you. It humbled him in a way no lecture ever had. He had built his identity around being someone with all the answers, yet here he was, silenced by a single sentence, not because it was complicated, but because it was true. He didn't immediately abandon everything, but from that night forward, the lens through which he saw the world changed forever. He began to read more, not to debate, but to understand. He wasn't trying to win anymore. He was trying to surrender. What had started as casual reading turned into a journey of transformation, all because of a verse that reminded him who he truly was. A soul searching for its creator. When he embraced Islam, he knew the cost would be high. This wasn't just a spiritual decision, it was a shift that would alter his identity, social circle, and career. He had spent decades earning respect in his religious community, building a reputation as a scholar, a leader, a teacher. People came to him for answers, and he was often seen as a guide in both faith and life. But once he uttered the words of the Shahada, everything changed. The respect he once had was replaced by suspicion. The admiration he received turned into criticism. Some former friends accused him of betrayal. Others simply walked away without a word. Even members of his own family struggled to understand what he had done. He went from being celebrated to being questioned, from being followed to being forgotten. Yet, in that loss, something incredible happened. For the first time in his life, he felt truly free. Free from the pressure of keeping up appearances. Free from the weight of others' expectations. Free to be honest with himself and with God. No more masks, no more titles. just a man and his creator. And in that simplicity, he found a kind of peace that no status had ever given him. The rituals of Islam, though unfamiliar at first, began to anchor his days. The 5 daily prayers gave him rhythm. The Quran gave him clarity. The humility of bowing and prostrating gave him something his years of scholarly recognition never could. The sweetness of submission. He had always taught people about God, but now he was living with God. He didn't need a pulpit or followers. His greatest moments were no longer public, but private. The quiet before dawn in prayer, the moments of reflection after reciting verses, the tears that came when he whispered du'as no one else could hear. He had traded applause for stillness, and he didn't miss the noise. What he once thought would be a life of isolation turned out to be the beginning of a life full of meaning. He had lost his place in the community, but he had gained his place with the one who mattered most. And in that inner transformation, he discovered the true definition of success. Not to be praised by people, but to be at peace with God. As he began to live as a Muslim, one of the first realizations that struck him was how diverse and borderless the faith truly was. Islam was not confined to any single culture, language, or nationality. Coming from a background where religion was often tied closely to ethnicity and ancestry, this was both surprising and refreshing. In his early interactions with the Muslim community, he met people from every walk of life. Indonesians with quiet smiles, Turkish shopkeepers with warm hospitality, African brothers with powerful recitation of the Quran, French converts with stories just as unique as his. The unity among them wasn't in appearance or accent or customs. It was in belief. They all said the same words in prayer, all turned in the same direction, all fasted in the same month, and all shared a love for one creator and one final prophet. This was a spiritual awakening for him. Islam didn't require him to change who he was culturally. It called him to refine who he was morally and spiritually. The emphasis wasn't on where you came from, but where you were going. He began to understand that the Ummah wasn't just a term used in books. It was a lived reality. When he prayed side by side with people from continents he had never visited, he felt something he hadn't felt even in his own previous religious gatherings, a sense of profound belonging. The religion wasn't imposed with force, nor was it absorbed passively. It was offered like water to the thirsty, pure, accessible, and necessary. He was amazed at how Islam addressed the human being as a whole, body, mind, heart, and soul. And it didn't matter whether you were rich or poor, black or white, Arab or European. What mattered was your sincerity, your intention, your submission to the truth once it reached you. The merit in Islam was not inherited. It was earned through devotion. This experience broke many of the assumptions he once held. He saw that Islam was not foreign. It was familiar in its message, universal in its values, and deeply personal in its connection to God. He realized that while the world often divides people based on race, history, or politics, Islam invited them to unite under one word, Tawheed, the oneness of God. And in that, he didn't feel like an outsider who had joined someone else's religion. He felt like a soul that had finally returned home. Coming from a background of deep theological study, legal complexity, and endless religious commentary, he was used to navigating a faith that often felt layered with intricacy. The texts were rich but overwhelming. and the path to spiritual connection sometimes felt clouded by scholarly debate and ritual detail. When he entered Islam, he expected more of the same, a dense system of rulings, traditions, and arguments. But what he found instead was a simplicity that pierced through the noise. Islam didn't feel like a burden of knowledge to be carried. It felt like a direction to be followed. It wasn't that it lacked depth, it was that it gave clarity. 5 pillars, one God, one final messenger, a declaration of faith, prayer, charity, fasting, and pilgrimage. Nothing felt excessive, yet everything felt complete. He was surprised by how accessible it all was. The idea that anyone, regardless of background, education, or status, could connect directly with the Creator was both humbling and empowering. There were no barriers, no intermediaries, no secret knowledge, no cost of priests, just a man, his sincerity, and his willingness to bow. This form of spiritual minimalism wasn't a reduction of religion, it was a return to its essence. He found beauty in the regularity of the 5 prayers, how they acted like checkpoints for the soul. He found discipline in fasting, where hunger opened the heart to compassion and gratitude. He found meaning in the simple phrase Bismillah before each act, a constant reminder of divine presence. What struck him most was how Islam didn't demand perfection, it encouraged progress. It recognized human weakness, but provided a path for renewal. He had spent much of his past faith life trying to decode religious texts, always chasing the next level of knowledge. Now, for the first time, he felt like he could breathe. He started reading the book Couldn't Take, Pure Knowledge of Hebrew. Islam wasn't confusing, it was clear. And in that clarity, there was a strange richness, a depth that didn't require complication. The Quran wasn't just a text to be analyzed, it was a message to be lived. The Prophet's life wasn't just to be admired, it was to be followed. This new way of life didn't ask him to abandon scholarship, but it reminded him of something more important. The goal of religion is not information, it is transformation. And Islam had done that for him, not by overloading him with rules, but by guiding him with purpose. He had spent years wrapped in layers of identity, rabbi, scholar, teacher, community leader. These roles gave him a sense of status, structure, and respect, but they also trapped him in expectation. Much of his life had been shaped by the need to uphold an image, to carry forward tradition, and to be a symbol of continuity in a religious world that was often resistant to change. When he embraced Islam, those layers began to peel away. It was no longer about being known as someone important. It became about being sincere with God. He moved from a life centered on identity to a life focused on purpose. What Islam gave him was not a new label. It gave him a mission, a reason to wake up every day with intention. No longer was his faith about preserving the past. It was about preparing for the eternal. Acts that once felt routine were now filled with meaning. Prayer was not a performance. It was a conversation. Charity wasn't about community image. It was about purifying the soul. Fasting wasn't a ritual of denial. It was a training of the heart. Fasting wasn't a ritual of denial. It was a training of the heart. He began to see himself not as a man carrying religion, but as a servant carrying responsibility. He no longer needed to be at the center of attention. He found contentment in being unknown to the world and known to God. The idea of serving others, helping quietly, and living with humility replaced the need to stand on stages or hold positions. This transformation shifted his inner world. The pressure to be perfect gave way to the freedom to be real. Islam taught him that true worth is not found in how others perceive you, but in how sincerely you strive to please the Creator. The more he lived this way, the more fulfilled he became. The mission was not just to be Muslim, it was to embody the mercy, justice, and beauty of Islam in daily life, to smile at strangers, to forgive when it's hard, to be honest, even when no one is watching. These simple acts became part of something far greater than himself. The mission was not just to be Muslim. It was only when no one is watching, to smile at strangers, to be honest where most are ruined, to be kind to all men, to be honest even when no one is watching. They became his path to peace. And for the first time, he understood that faith was not about protecting an identity, but about living with divine purpose every single day. In the end, his story is not just about conversion, it's about transformation. It's about a man who went from carrying religious titles to carrying truth in his heart, from living for recognition to living for purpose, from questions without peace to peace beyond words. Islam didn't erase his past. It elevated his future. It gave him clarity in a noisy world, humility in place of ego, and direction when everything else felt lost. His journey reminds us that faith is not inherited, it's discovered. And when you discover it with sincerity, it reshapes everything: how you live, how you love, how you worship, and how you die. To everyone watching, may his journey be a mirror for your own. May it inspire you to seek deeper, to ask real questions, and to never fear the truth when it knocks. Good luck on your own journey, wherever you are and wherever you're heading. Thank you for watching. May peace and purpose find you just as it found him.